Hello, welcome to another episode of the Pitt Mailbag Show from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We're your hosts, Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson, your Pitt beat writers here for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, you can subscribe to this show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers and our Tuesday episodes of the Pitt Mailbag Show that comes out every single week where we answer your questions here on the show. And there's been a bit of activity for Pitt. We were on the road last week to watch Pitt get crushed by Duke. Then they lost a tough one to Louisville over the weekend, and it's their first losing streak of the season that they're now at. We'll get to several of those questions, and let's lead off with a question from Cameron, who asks, how worried should Pitt be about its losing streak right now? Is this a sign of a downturn or a bump in the road? Now, Stephen, we talked about this in our post-game wrap-up of the Duke game. Pitt was up against it to go into Duke. That's a tough place for anybody to go win. So it's tough to expect that to be the bad one. But winning at home against Louisville, that I do think that was a potential marker game. And Louisville, is going to be one of those teams. At least they look like they'll be one of those teams that's going to be vying for those few ACC at-large bids for the March Madness tournament. So those are games that I do think Pitt needs to win. I don't know if it's a sign of a downturn, but it certainly needs to be a bump in the road if this team wants to be a tournament team at the end of the year.
Yeah, I'd say that Louisville game definitely represents more of a missed opportunity than I guess necessarily the start of a downturn in my mind. That could change if they lose to Florida State on Wednesday night. But for right now, I don't think there's any reason to hit the panic button. I mean, obviously, I think that Duke loss was pretty preordained. I mean, I'd be pretty stunned if Duke loses any games in ACC play the rest of the way. I don't think there's a team that's better than them. They're going to be competing for, they have an argument for being the number one overall team in the country right now. So that one doesn't concern me as much. But the Louisville one, I think, was a little bit more concerning. And the only reason that I don't think that you need to panic about it, though, is because the mistakes were correctable. Everything that went wrong for Pitt, I think, was within their grasp. And we're going to talk about it in a little bit, I think. But, those offensive rebounds that they gave up, I mean, a lot of that's just effort. They didn't get out-coached or out-schemed by Louisville. That's just focus and discipline and pursuing the ball on every play. So, it was a missed opportunity, but it's not something that I think Pitt can't recover from. They're still – 27th in Ken Palm. They're in the top 30 in the net, everything like that. Their resume still looks fine. The thing is, you can't afford many losses like this. A 500 record in ACC play isn't going to get it done this year. Mm-hmm. So you got to capitalize on these opportunities. And, Pitt, I think that starts with beating a pretty quality Florida State team on Wednesday.
No, I agree. I think one thing, Pitt has to avoid the bad losses. That's another thing that really tacked on to them last year. Like if they beat Missouri, I'm not saying they're definitely in, but it definitely would have made it a harder case for them to be kept out because that was their worst loss of the season last year by a lot of measures.
They lost to Syracuse. Sorry to interrupt you, but if they beat Syracuse once, if they don't lose to Syracuse twice, I mean, I think things look a little different there too. To your point, like they're bad teams in the ACC that you just can't lose to. Like they're must-win games, and then there are can't-lose games in the ACC.
No, I agree, and I don't think Louisville. It's you'll want to win those games, but at the same time, it's not. I don't think losing to Louisville is a death knell in and of itself. Now, it could end up being part of a resume that doesn't get you in if you don't do other things in the season. But they get to play Louisville again at the KFC Yum Center. They need to get their revenge when that happens if they want to do that. But let's talk about some other things. Something that happened in that Louisville game was something that you wrote about in your analysis after the game. Franklin asked, why did Jeff Capel play the same five guys for the last 17 minutes against Louisville? Stephen, you got to ask him that. I wasn't able to be there for that one. But what was Jeff Capel's response in talking about the strategy there?
Yeah, I think it was more this morning on the ACC coaches call. He gave a little bit more detail into it. But I think it was pretty simply like he didn't have a ton of confidence in the bench's ability to be game changers and provide some of the energy that team really needed. It seemed like he was not pleased with how his bench played. I mean, I don't have the quote in front of me. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he essentially said that going into practice this week, there'll be opportunities for guys who are able to defend and rebound and, are on the same page or know what I think the phrase he used was know what we want to do. on offense and defense. So I think maybe, reading between the lines a little bit, some of the prep that these reserve guys did wasn't great, maybe leading in to the Louisville game. But obviously it really did cost them for Jeff Capel to have to shorten the bench a little bit because, we talked about effort and focus and pursuing those offensive rebounds. And you would have to assume that maybe some fresher legs, especially when you have, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, who did have some foul trouble, but only had 3 fouls. And, Jorge Diaz-Graham, who's also, 7', 6'11", was sitting on the bench. And, so was Amsel Dolalich, who didn't play at all, but, has played sparingly the past 3 games. But, that Cal game, if you remember, he kind of changed the game a little bit with his rebounding. I think he had 6 rebounds in that game. So there were guys who I think had the potential to, help them out rebounding wise and maybe give them some more size. Papa Conte also didn't play very much. But, Jeff Capel just clearly, I guess, wasn't getting what he wanted out of that bench and thought that he had to roll with his starters. But I think it did end up costing them down the stretch.
Which is, it seems like that's uncharacteristic of this Pitt team. What's won them so many games is their bench. Papa Conte coming off the bench against Ohio State. Zach Austin, when he was the 6th man, coming off the bench for Pitt in a lot of their early games. Jorge Diaz-Graham coming off and hitting 3-pointers. Brandon Cummins coming off the bench for 30 points. They've had so many great bench performances. And so I think that's what catches me off guard about not there being no switches, especially now Damian Dunn's healthy. Zach Austin's healthy. Guillermo Diaz-Graham's health. It's not like this is back, a couple years ago when Jeff Capel used to talk about how, like, man, we've only had 9 guys available, so we've had to be very careful. They got the full, gamut of guys to roll through. I'm a little caught off guard by Jeff, taking that approach in this game because of, not great practices. But hey, maybe this is part of, discipline. Maybe this is a part of how you challenge players to be better. He's like, I'm not going to play you unless you lock in during the week. And maybe that's part of how Jeff Capel wants to make his team become better and more consistent.
Yeah, I mean, he's told us that, guys earn minutes, they're not given out or anything like that. And so if you're not playing well enough to deserve to be on the floor, then he's not going to play you. But yeah, so, I mean, I think it's partially that, Capel should probably be able to trust his bench a little bit more and should reach in there. I thought he could have afforded to go to his bench a little bit more on Saturday afternoon, but also, those guys aren't showing in practice or early in the game that they are capable of handing some important minutes, then you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place, and you can't exactly lean on a bench if they're not giving you reasons to be confident in them.
Absolutely. Let's move on to Kevin's question here, who says, what's going on with Ishmael Leggett? Had a rough week scoring. How do they get him back on track? Now, Steven, looking at Ishmael Leggett, he shot 2 of 15 from the floor against Duke and only made 1 2-pointer against Louisville. He did go 4 from 6 from deep there, but it seems like his rhythm as a shooter has been a bit off now for a bit for Pitt. And that's not something that you want. You want him and Jalen Lowe humming. You want them doing well. And on the season, Ishmael Leggett's still a good shooter. He's shooting 49% from the field like you want. But what have you seen that's been wrong with Ishmael Leggett and why he's had a couple? He's been struggling in these losses that Pitt's had.
Yeah, I think, against Duke, it was pretty obvious. I mean, everyone struggled to shoot the ball in that game, and Duke's length and their outstanding defense was as good as advertised, and it was really good at holding Leggett in check, and it was just harder for him to use his strength and, make some of those tough shots that, we've seen him make pretty regularly. But I think also he's maybe not making some great decisions. Jeff Capel told us today that he thinks that Ish is maybe forcing a few shots. I give Ish credit. He did have 4 assists, I believe, in the game on Saturday. That was, I believe, a season tied for season high. He's had 4 assists a couple times, but I think especially against Duke and at times against Louisville, there were opportunities for him to kick the ball out and find someone else, find a different shooter or get someone else involved that he wasn't taking. And so if he's able to be more of a playmaker, it'll help him out a lot. It'll open the lane up a little bit more for him. But I think also getting Damian Dunn back, another guy who can handle the ball and score, that should help a lot too. Ultimately, though, I don't know if there's anything that Pitt can necessarily do to get him back on track. I think a lot of it falls on Leggett and the decisions that he's making.
Yeah, I think that Ishmael Leggett just needs to kind of settle down in some games. I think that there's times that, and look, the Pitt's been a very guard heavy team. I think that's what wins them a lot of their games is Ishmael Leggett and Jalen Lowe taking over, hitting shots, driving to the basket, creating for others. Those are things that you want. And when you attack and when you're aggressive, some days you're gonna do it the wrong way. You're gonna run into a couple road stops, and you got to get kind of figure out your own issues. I think Ishmael Leggett will. He's been a good veteran for Pitt. And I think that that's something he can fix. And again, it's 2 games here. Let's see how he rebounds throughout the rest of the year. This is the guy who was an ACC 6th man of the year last year. And for the most part, he's been very good for Pitt this year. I wouldn't put too much on it. I think getting him back on track might just be a him thing, like you said, just about, hey, just play within yourself, play within the scheme, play within the plan, and things will let the game come to you, and you'll make the plays. Let's go to our last question here from Ray. He says, now that Damian Dunn is healthy, shouldn't he be back in the starting lineup? Could Zack Austin stay and Guillermo Diaz-Graham come off the bench? Now, Steven, Guillermo Diaz-Graham, of course, was struggling, shooting from the field, but in the past few games, he has really picked up his shooting, at least made it, he shot less, but he's been able to hit a bit better, at least hit more 3-pointers for Pitt, and I think that's a good thing. Granted, he didn't get a single point in this last game against Louisville, but I think that there might be something there if you want to go. Now, granted, you want size, you want length, and that's what Guillermo Diaz-Graham gives you at 7'1". But Zack Austin's a heck of an athlete. It's tough to take him off the floor when he plays as well as he does. I mean, that one block he had against Louisville was phenomenal. And we know he's a much better shooter. He can attack the rim. He does a lot of the things well. And Damian Dunn showed he's resilient too, and he has a lot of skills. Is this a move that you could see being a legitimate move by Jeff Capel, or do you think you still want 2 guys with serious length like Cam Corrin and Guillermo Diaz-Graham on the floor to at least start for Pitt?
Yeah, it's definitely a move I could see Jeff Capel making. It's maybe the one that I would make. I mean, look, so the length is really important, and having 2 guys who are 6'10" or taller in the starting lineup has been a big part of why Pitt's been able to play some decent defense, and why up until that Louisville game they had been a pretty good rebounding team. But thing is, I mean, Damian Dunn had 8 rebounds on Saturday afternoon. And so, if he's able to defend and rebound like we know he can, I think it would kind of behoove Jeff Capel to put his 3 best guards on the floor at the same time and just let them, have as much time together on the floor together to create offense and open things up. And then you can kind of bring in some reinforcements in terms of size whenever you need that. So I feel like, to a certain extent, less is more for Guillermo Diaz-Graham as well. I don't think you can take Zack Austin out of the lineup. I think he's too important defensively, and he's shooting the ball so well. I think Diaz-Graham is the one whose minutes I think would maybe have to be cut back a little bit in order to make some room for Dunn. I think it's also possible that, Jeff Capel just goes with what was really comfortable at the beginning of the year, and that was Dunn in the starting lineup with Diaz-Graham and Corrin and Lowe and Leggett. And then you bring Austin off the bench because he's able to fit in a bunch of different roles for you. So it's a move I could see him making, but I think it's honestly more likely that they keep Dunn, at least for Wednesday night, that they kind of keep Dunn on the bench and Austin Diaz-Graham starting, and then kind of go from there and see what the results are.
Yeah, I think you need to figure out your pace here. And again, Jeff Capel's made it clear, just his starters don't mean that those are the guys who are going to play the most minutes. It's just how he rolls things. I mean, at the beginning of the season, they were bringing Zack Austin off the bench, and then he was playing, just as many minutes as his starters. So I think it's not necessarily something that's going to, we can see that starting lineup, but I think what's really going to happen is you're going to see Dunn and Austin on the floor more than Diaz-Graham, or either of the Diaz-Graham twins, because of their versatility and their usefulness in Pitt's plans. So I could see something like that happen. But thank you, Ray, for your question. Also, thank you, Kevin, Franklin, and Cameron, all for your questions this week here on the Pitt Mailbag Show. We're your Pitt beat writers, Chris Carter and Stephen Thompson. As always, you can subscribe to this show like you subscribe to all of our shows through the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all our Tuesday episodes when we answer your questions on our Pitt Mailbag show, as well as the daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. We got more coming all week long. Pitt plays Florida State in Tallahassee. We'll have some thoughts after that game here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Subscribe to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette by going to post-gazette.com. Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.